Next up, we're taking a deep dive into e-commerce for our last but one panel of the day. Please welcome to the stage Chua of the South China Morning Post and his e-commerce panelists. Please put your hands together. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I think we are either the second last or the last session today, so thanks for sticking around. So today we're going to have a panel on the electronic Silk Road, which is basically talking about e-commerce. And today we have three panelists who have a wealth of experience, a range of experience. Maybe I'll just let them introduce themselves briefly before we kick it off.
Okay, hi, I'm James. Pretty much the MD APAC for HelpLink. So HelpLink is pretty much an e-commerce platform or e-commerce marketplace for home services. And right now we are very focused on the domestic cleaning side of things because it's a huge market in Singapore and in Australia, which I both cover. Moving forward, definitely we are looking at different verticals, and today, I hope I can share about the e-commerce aspect of services. And, it's probably going to be quite different from what the other two speakers have to share. So, yeah, stay tuned for more.
Dalad?
Hi, so my name's Dalad, and I suppose I kind of most recently headed up strategy and M&A for Walmart, so which, a lot of people ask me, wait, there's Walmart in Asia? So, Walmart operates in China, India, and Japan. And prior to that, sort of former career in Bain & Company, doing a lot of consumer products, moved over to private equity, did more consumer and retail, kind of pretty much spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia, Asia Pacific, Middle East, UK. So, I think, happy to speak about, sort of India, China, Japan retail, and obviously Omni-Channel is kind of topic of the day. But, whether the sort of the role of a consumer and how that crosses over each other. Yeah, that's it.
Good. And I'm Simon, so I look after what we call Omni-Channel and customer innovation at Sephora in Southeast Asia. So the last 5 years I've been with Sephora, selling lipsticks basically. And so with a background in e-commerce, we are now really much looking at how do we integrate a fantastic e-commerce business with the great customer experience of our stores, and what does the customer experience of Sephora look like the next sort of 5-10 years.
Okay, Simon, since you're sitting beside me, I will start with you.
Sure.
What do we not know about selling lipstick online? And does a consumer buy lipstick differently if, I suppose, it would be a she?
Yeah, most of the time. I mean, we don't discriminate. So first of all, of course, lipstick is a very, very small segment of what we do, and there's not a lot of our customers who only buy that one product group. But if we take the experience of buying a lipstick, I think you can then, first of all, take a sort of a chisel down in the middle and say, are you replenishing something you've bought before and that you like, or are you buying something new? And then you have two entirely different customer journey paths coming after that. And if we look at e-commerce, for example, where we have a great business for makeup, you have discovery problems. Like, we have 3,000 red lipsticks in our assortment, and yet we can only show you 30 when you look at a normal category grid page. So there is a problem around personalization. There's a problem around discovery. You also have a problem around swatching. So people in a traditional setting will go, this is what the physical Sephora concept lends itself very well to, is really the play and learn aspect of just being able to swatch a lipstick, look at the long-lastingness, see how it goes against your skin. You can't do that online the same way, so that's where we got to think about things like augmented reality technology to start bridging the gap for that. And that's just lipstick. Then we have, 30, 40 other sort of product categories that really matter in the company. So,
When we're talking about the region, right, we tend to think of it as a homogeneous market, but it's not. It's made up of different countries, different cultures, different languages, different shopping habits. Do you see any differences across the markets when it comes to online and offline shopping behavior?
absolutely. And so I think so I look after the Southeast Asia region, which for us includes Australia and New Zealand, and I think what we see broadly, because there's so much to open up there, is that one thing that really differs for the markets is where customers are getting their brand discovery from. Because what we are very well aware of is that even though we are in some ways, by being a multi-brand retailer, we are part of showcasing new products to a consumer, in most cases the customers have actually heard about or learned about these products and these brands somewhere else. So when we look at the different countries, we have completely different vectors and different directions of where consumers are looking. So you have in Australia and New Zealand where the consumers are really looking at American influencers, for example. And then you have a Singaporean or a Hong Kong consumer that's looking much more to Korean and Japanese, to some degree Chinese influencers. And so I think what we are trying to look at is, as we put together the selection of what products are on shelf, whether it's in our stores or online, we got to be very cognizant about where the customers are looking in terms of what do we put on shelf, but also who do we partner with in terms of influencers and tastemakers and so on.
Mm-hmm. Dalad, you were part of the team that put together the Walmart Flipkart deal. Can you share with us maybe your experience in looking at the India market, and what were some of the factors that kind of went into that deal? Yeah.
Sure. So I guess the first thing to share, and you're an editor yourself, is the biggest insight I found working in India and spending a lot of time there over the last sort of 8 to 9 months, is that the media in India is extremely accurate. So whatever you might have read on the transaction, it goes pretty deep, right? So I think that's one. I think in terms of the transaction itself, I think India has a lot of parallels for Southeast Asia. I think as a retailer, as an e-commerce company, there's a lot to be extracted. So just as India was looking at China and taking learnings and seeing if that's the multiple of growth in terms of GMV, in terms of customer take rates, etc. What does that look like for India in sort of next 3, 5, 10 years? I think the same parallels and learnings can be applied to Southeast Asia e-commerce players. Take Indonesia. I think Tokopedia is a good example of a company that is sort of trailing the type of growth rate that Flipkart was going through. I think India itself is a continent that has a lot of different languages, different subcultures, religions. But I think you take that and you compare to Southeast Asia, and I think what's exciting about Southeast Asia is that the wealth of middle-class consumers is a lot more concentrated, and I'm sure Simon, you see that when you're sort of retailing cosmetics, which pretty much addresses a lot of women or metrosexuals that are sort of emerging middle class, upper middle class, and so on and so forth. So you have that kind of sweet spot, I think, in Southeast Asia that India doesn't have. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, as companies out here, whether you are brick and mortar retailer or you're e-commerce retailers, to really look at a market like India, which in many ways is more advanced in terms of e-commerce development, in terms of sort of tech startups, etc., and sort of extract that and say, hey, hang on, so if this is happening in India, how do we actually take that learning, do something better, and create more alpha and more multiples in terms of how you grow that. So for me, it's very fascinating to have that cross-border learnings and sharings.
I want to come back to China maybe later, but
Sure, yeah.
James, when we were off stage, you mentioned that you guys charge above the market.
Yep.
And why? Is that a good business model?
Okay, so generally, what you expect out of e-commerce platforms would be something that is slightly lower priced than what you can get out there in the mom and pop shops or the brick and mortar, I'll say. So with HelpLink, we chose to target a more discerning group of customers, a more discerning segment of customers within the middle to upper class, within Singapore and Australia. And the reason why we do that is because we understand that this group of customers are the ones that appreciate convenience that the HelpLink platform pretty much provides. So with just a tap, on your app, you can basically get a cleaner within 24 hours. This is the kind of promises, the USPs that we deliver to our customers, and I would say reducing friction in getting a cleaner is our greatest promise and the highest value promise that we can deliver to our customers. So generally, yes, our prices are definitely above the market rate for getting cleaners, getting service providers, but yeah, we don't regret this decision, and it's likely that, even in the future, we will not, deviate from this North Star, and for as long as we can ensure a certain level of customer experience. Yep.
Are there any notable differences between, say, someone in Australia consuming your service compared to, say, in Singapore or even in Europe?
Oh yeah, definitely. So a trend that we notice in Singapore is that there are actually a lot more recurring bookings when it comes to our GMV analysis. And what we suspect is that the average consumer, the average customer in Singapore for HelpLink would be someone who is a lot more tight on time, okay? The person, the ideal customer basically does not have any time, to engage in any household chores or any household activities. So this is one thing that we notice in Singapore, and it's pretty much, aligned with the whole metropolitan, image of Singapore being very fast-paced, very busy. And we're talking about, if you compare it with the other cities that we're present in, Berlin, Paris, Sydney, even in the UAE, none of them actually can, win Singapore when it comes to recurring bookings. So that is a unique insight that we got from our data. Yep.
Is that a problem, the market differences? When kind of building an e-commerce business across a region? In terms of, you have to customize to the kind of unique characteristics of each market. That's, I don't know. Does that increase the cost of development or customer acquisition?
Oh yeah, definitely. So let me cite the example of Australia. So last year, the ATO actually suspended the gig economy in Australia, and HelpLink was definitely affected because the bulk of our cleaners are actually freelancers on our platform. The first thing that we had to do then was to pivot our business model in Australia to somewhat like an e-commerce, but on a franchise basis. So we actually approached cleaning companies in Australia to take up our cleaners, our providers basically, and also our customers, simply because we couldn't run them on our own anymore due to the regulations. So that is something that we encountered in Australia. In Singapore so far, it has been quite comfortable, but basically what I would say is that the protection for customers in Singapore is significantly lower than in Europe. So we get less complaints, we get less attrition issues, simply because, it's just not on par. In terms of customer protection, it's simply not on par with Europe. So Singapore actually remains to be quite an appealing market for HelpLink. Yeah.
Fewer complaints from Singapore, that's a first, I must say.
Well, yeah.
Simon?
So, I was kind of thinking as you were answering, I don't think there is any silver bullet to it. So Sephora has a history in Southeast Asia of about 10 years. We're actually just coming up to our 10-year anniversary of starting our first store here in Singapore in Ngee Ann City. And so as we have been expanding to more and more markets, I think naturally we've had to develop the team. I don't think that was really planned from the beginning, and so we've had to make adjustments as we have gone along. A couple of big things we've done, right? So we have taken a lot of the marketing and animation creative planning back from our central team in Europe. Because what we realized is when Paris is ready to run a K-beauty animation, we are already like leaps and leaps ahead. So where a couple of years, 3 years ago, we might just have taken their cue on that, the kind of result we were getting is that you'd be in one of our stores and you'd hear the music and it would basically be French K-pop. And so what we've had to do is then think about, fresh slate, how would we want to solve this? And so we take it in, and now we actually have a photo studio and videography studio right in the office where we do all of that production ourselves. Then, of course, in terms of language, payment options, logistics, and so on, you just need to deal with the markets that you have, but I see that almost as hygiene factors. And then for us, a massive part of the puzzle is, of course, selection, because we are a multi-brand retailer. So while we do some regional merchandising and take some decisions on a Southeast Asia or Asia level, or even a global level, we actually give quite a lot of autonomy back to our countries to decide on what they want to do in order to make the best Sephora experience in each of those countries. And so you will have teams out there looking at, Google Trend search history for figuring out if there's any brands that are emerging in customer search, right? They're able to move on these things faster. They're able to meet the brands where they are. And so it just makes no sense for us to take that control back.
I've spent a number of years living and covering China, and I think one big takeaway from my time there is seeing a lot of big American MNCs, big names, going to China and not doing so well. They actually pull out, and I think one of the reasons that have commonly ascribed to their pull out is they brought the model that was successful maybe in San Francisco or New York and tried to replicate it in China. So in terms of, I just want to go to your point about autonomy, regional autonomy, and telling HQ that you are lips and lips behind us. Yeah. How important is having the innovation coming from the region where the business is based? How important is that for, say, a global business to be successful?
Well, I mean, from my experiences, sort of whether during my time at Walmart, which is a major Fortune 1 company, in previous time, in consumer products that are Fortune companies, as well as being on the other side where you're a single market operator, advising portfolio companies that are China driven. I think it comes back down to the organizational philosophy on the role of the region, the role of the markets versus the role of HQ. So whether that's Bentonville, Arkansas, or that's New York, or that's San Francisco, I think especially for large, complex organizations, the philosophy at the top defines how you want to engage your regions and how you want to engage the markets. I think nobody questions the need in this day and age to be local. Whether you are an investor, an operator, I think it's no doubt that whether it's China or India or Southeast Asia, the markets are so local and you need local talent, you need local understanding, or if you want to bring in a team of expats, you need a team of international professionals who actually truly understand the market. I mean, I think one sort of very sort of obvious and common and seemingly trivial, observations that I've seen sort of advising or working with large companies is, you would suddenly have a room, full of management from HQ who, you may have sort of middle managers who come into an emerging market like India and start asking questions like, well, why do you do that? Because we don't do those things in America. And then you have the other side of the table who's like, well, you're not in America. Or you have, people coming in trying to steer decisions or drive the markets without really going deep enough into the front line. So I come back to organizational philosophy, the construct of how you as a firm or how we as a firm want to address, grow, enable the markets to achieve their growth and vision, and the need to really sort of be able to drive that appetite to really understanding, whether that's consumer behavior, consumer trends, whatever it is, right, business development opportunities. So back to your question on why have a number, I mean, especially in retail, I think in China, we've seen Carrefour pull out, you've seen, and I think Walmart in China is probably last man standing in terms of a, corporate, Fortune MNC company. And Walmart itself in China had to go through a lot of sort of journey, right, to get to, and a lot of that goes back to leadership. A lot of that goes back to they've tried sort of, very, American-centric leadership. They've tried sort of, okay, let's bring in a Chinese CEO. Now let's bring in, sort of a group of sort of, Asianized, leadership team that is somewhat westernized in terms of ways of doing things, but truly have an appetite to understand the market itself. So, I think for large, complex organizations, it's very much tone at the top, and then how do you carry that through all the way to the front line? Obviously, that would differ, depending on scale and scope of your baseline.
You mentioned just now that in India's e-commerce scene probably took a leaf out of China's.
Yep.
We are seeing a lot of the tech giants from China
Yep.
Pushing into India,
Yes.
as well as Southeast Asia.
Yes.
I think Alibaba obviously bought
Yep.
Lazada and is
Yep.
pumping billions. What are some of the best practices that you think have been originating in China
Yep.
that could be replicated successfully in Southeast Asia?
Yep.
And conversely, what probably would not work?
So I personally really admire Tencent as a company, which I had the privilege of working with, and I think what large Chinese conglomerates or Chinese tech companies, I think could sort of that do really well. I think they recognize that China and their home market is big enough, and there's multiple cross-border opportunities. Southeast Asia is marked as one, but it's not about going in and copy and pasting, right? It's not saying, oh, we have WeChat and it works really well, and that's going to be our ecosystem. They take a more of an investor mindset, I think, and a portfolio business mindset where you take an internal diagnostic of saying what are our core strengths, our core pillars in our ecosystem. And if we look at attractive markets in Southeast Asia, we say we want to win not win, right? But we want positions, and we want alliances and strategic partnerships. So I think it's really more about an ecosystem mindset. If you are sort of coming from a large, successful Chinese companies that are trying to, obtain positions or have stakes in this, fast and growing and very sexy Southeast Asian region, instead of going in and trying to replicate. So I think that's one. I think number two, not saying that you can't go in and copy a successful model, but I think ultimately, just as many businesses, you need a strong local partner. You need to really pick well in terms of, who do you want to work with. You need to be able to go in and scan the market and different verticals, different value chain, and really identify where the value creation potential is going to be. What do you bring to the table? What sort of cross market learnings can you do? And I think if people start behaving that way, I think sharing is caring, and you can kind of sort of somehow leverage each other. Then I think you're able to enable the Southeast Asian companies to learn from the China experience, but you can also create more channels of value deployment, right? You can, if you're consumer products or a retailer, you can start having extra markets and go and vice versa. They have access and cross-border channels back into China. So as long as you have that sort of value accretive loop, I think that's kind of the mindset that would make things work.
James, for your business, where is the wellspring of innovation, and where are the best practices kind of emerging in your industry?
Sorry?
Where is the innovation happening? Which markets are kind of driving that innovation in your business?
Okay, so we are in the e-commerce for services sector. Okay, and generally services would be a lot harder to deal with than products because we're dealing with humans here. And customer experience is definitely something that we look at very seriously in Helpling. So in the past years when we were scaling up, basically, we did encounter issues where the technology was not up to par. Okay, customers weren't happy. The service providers were not up to par too. And all these things we have kind of ironed it out, okay, in the coming few years, okay? And we are very focused on ensuring that our customers are always satisfied, and we track it over the NPS, over retention metrics, and definitely innovation is an enabler for all these KPIs to be met. because after all, Helpling is itself still an offshoot of Rocket Internet. So it's actually a venture that was initially backed by Rocket Internet. So KPIs matter a lot to us. And well, like I mentioned just now, innovation in terms of the product, in terms of the services, in terms of the way we communicate with the customers, in terms of the various touch points that we have with them. All these things are catered or geared towards enhancing customer experience. Yep. So this is.
Are there any particular kind of experiences that you've gotten from perhaps Australia that was then kind of scaled across the organization to other markets?
Not so much in Australia, though.
Okay.
More in Singapore.
Okay.
Okay, so in Singapore, being a very agile market, we do test a lot of ideas in Singapore. So one thing that we tested in Singapore was variable pricing. All right. In the past, we used to have a standard flat rate for all service providers, regardless of how good you are, or regardless of how many good ratings you had. But in recent times, all right, we implemented a variable pricing model in Singapore that really took off. Okay, so service providers which with better cleaning abilities or with higher ratings are able to now charge higher prices. And this idea of a whole marketplace for cleaners basically took off in Singapore, and it was basically adapted in Europe. So that is something that sprung out of Singapore in a sense. And we couldn't have tested out in Europe because of the sensitivity of the law there. But in Singapore, it's agile. We could test it on a small scale and just experience how the customers, react to it. And from there, the positive reaction says it all, and, yep. We exported it to Europe, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a few more minutes before time is up. So maybe, Simon, where do you see the kind of split between online and physical retail, for Sephora's business? Because, I mean, to me, buying a lipstick is very physical.
Yeah. Look, so Sephora is really a company that's been in e-commerce much longer than most people think. Like in the US, we've had e-commerce for over 10 years. In France, we've had e-commerce for, I think, 12 or 13 years. In China, we've been having e-commerce for almost 9 years. And in Singapore and Southeast Asia, last sort of 3-4 years. So we've been in this game for a while. And I think where we see it going is, yes, we need to be present on e-commerce and we need to be present on m-commerce for purchases that people want to make there. So if you are replenishing a shampoo that you bought 4 times before, you probably want to replenish it there because there's no value add in going back and smelling it again. And there are certain customers who would want to make more types of purchases online. But we don't see the stores and the kind of value of the stores going anywhere. Rather, what we have discovered is this idea that as soon as we brought the website online in 2016 in Southeast Asia, what we started realizing right away was that you start having this amazing cross-channel behavior, and especially a lot of what we call pre-store behavior. So you also have a situation now where you have an e-commerce team that's really looking at a conversion rate. And at the same time, what we need to be mindful of is that there's probably a lot of these sessions, a lot of this traffic that is never supposed to convert in that moment. There's a lot of people who are just trying to figure out, is this item going to be on this shelf if I go down into the store near me? Or what are the opening hours for this store? Or are there any events going on? Or can I book a makeover with my favorite makeup artist? So what we are really doubling down on now is this idea of how do we make an amazing pre-store experience, because we are still all about the stores and the service and the experience that goes on there.
Dalad, any concluding remarks?
With regards to...
I mean, future of e-commerce in Southeast Asia, what is your one prediction for the direction or any particular innovation that's going to happen in this region?
I guess I would say, the direction of travel in terms of digital transformation in retail for Southeast Asia is that, I think there's a couple of convergences that will need to happen. I think that line between retailers and brands is very much becoming more and more blurry. I think consumer products company and retailers are converging. The role of the middleman is changing. I think as you think along the value chain, how do you sort of ensure that you really have the right capabilities, whether that's sort of upstream and supply chain. I think the changes in consumer behavior will really drive, how companies are going to come up with solutions that meet the demands that is, very dynamically changing. I think cross-border opportunities, cross-market opportunities is going to be a lot more relevant across companies. Yeah.
James?
Well, I would say the whole e-commerce landscape right now in Southeast Asia is very focused on products, right? But moving forward, in fact, most of the research that are being done by consultancies are very focused on the e-commerce market for products. But I see moving forward, okay, the e-commerce for services would start picking up. And I mean, if you just look at Indonesia with Gojek, okay, they do have Go Clean and all this, Go Doctors, and all these different services are being digitalized basically. So I don't see why not in the rest of Asia, in Singapore. Okay, for all you know, we could have more doctors on the go, or medical platforms and all these things. And that I would say is the next step for Asia. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.